American imperialism was a period between the 1890s and the 1910s when America, fueled by manifest destiny, extended its political, military, and economic control over weaker territories.
Three factors fueled U.S. imperialism. The first is a desire for greater military strength. The second was a search for new markets. And the third was a belief in our cultural superiority.
First, let's talk about the desire for military strength. To compete in the world, the U.S. needed a dominant military. Admiral Alfred Mahan created a plan for U.S. military dominance. First, we needed to build a modern navy. Next, he desired to acquire Hawaii. This would create a naval base in the Central Pacific that would allow American military and economic ships a location to refuel and resupply. Next, we would establish naval bases in the Caribbean. This would allow for control and dominance of the Western Hemisphere. Sugar was a very popular and profitable product. By 1887, American sugar plantation owners controlled 75% of Hawaiian land. Provisions in the Bayonet Constitution stated that you had to be a landowner in order to vote, and with 75% of Hawaiian lands belonging to American plantation owners, American businessmen in Hawaii were now able to control the vote and the Hawaiian government.
In 1891, the king's sister, Liliuokalani, becomes queen. As rightful heir to the throne, Queen Liliuokalani fights back against American businessmen. Pledging to rid Hawaii of all foreign influence, she vows to return control of the Hawaiian government back to Native Hawaiians. Standing in the way of American business profit and control, Sanford B. Dole, an American businessman, staged a coup against the Queen and depose her in 1893. The Queen is removed from office. Sanford B. Dole and the American businessmen in Hawaii set up a provincial government, electing Dole president. In 1898, they petitioned the U.S. government to annex Hawaii as a territory. The Congress approves, and Hawaii becomes a United States territory.
It's the 1890s and America is looking to flex its muscles. The United States looks to exert its power in the Western Hemisphere. Remember the Maine will be the rallying cry that launches America to war.
After only 16 weeks of conflict, Spain was defeated. The war officially comes to an end with the signing of the Treaty of Paris of 1898. In the treaty, Cuba gains its independence as its own sovereign nation, but it becomes a U.S. protectorate, which is essentially a little brother country. Cuba was sovereign and can govern itself, but the United States had the ability to intervene at times in Cuban affairs. Altogether, the United States gained 3 new territories from the Spanish-American War: Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippine Islands. So why does this matter? The Spanish-American War is a hugely influential event of the 20th century. With the victory in the Spanish-American War, the United States officially becomes a world power. The other countries of the world would have to recognize our military strength and officially consider the United States as a player on the world stage. American military power is now respected worldwide. By the conclusion of the Spanish-American War, America had officially gained a worldwide empire with the territories it annexed in the Pacific and the Caribbean. With American territorial success in the Caribbean and the Pacific, and a desire to expand their influence even further to compete with European powers, American influence even reached China. Great Britain, France, Russia, Japan, and Germany all had spheres of influence in China. A sphere of influence is a zone where a foreign country had control of trade through that area. One country that did not have a sphere of influence in China was the United States. American Secretary of State John Hay sought to change this and issued his open notes to each nation in China. In the open notes, he proposed to openly share trade access in China without cutting out the United States. Essentially, this open-door policy would tear down the barriers that kept each sphere of influence under the control of separate nations, and would promote free trade across China. All the nations agreed, and the open-door policy in China was adopted, meaning the United States could freely engage in trade and not be left out of the vast resources that China had to offer. The United States claimed a stake in valuable markets and sold their goods and made money. John Hay's open-door policy also meant that the United States would have a claim in Asian affairs far into the future.
The first president that we'll look at is Teddy Roosevelt and his foreign policy that he called Big Stick Diplomacy. Roosevelt was determined to not allow Europe and Asia to control world affairs all by themselves. He He was dedicated to making the United States a world power in the Western Hemisphere. In 1904, Roosevelt issues the Roosevelt Corollary to the Monroe Doctrine. The Corollary is a re-emphasis of the Monroe Doctrine, in which Roosevelt asserts the United States would use military power to become a world police force and protect its interests in the Western Hemisphere, and is based on his philosophy.
Speak softly and carry a big stick. You will go far.
In this case, the big stick is American military power, highlighted by the Great White Fleet. The United States is willing to back its stance as the dominant power in the West with use of military force.
Perfect example of Roosevelt's big stick diplomacy is the Panama Canal. Roosevelt was adamant to build a canal to connect the Pacific and the Atlantic Oceans. He believed it would enhance trade, travel, and improve dominance of the U.S. military, allowing us to protect the East Coast and the West Coast simultaneously. He also saw the Panama Canal as his legacy to the world. Who else but Roosevelt would be able to do something that nature did not do, by connecting the Atlantic and the Pacific Oceans together? The territory of Panama was controlled at the time by the nation of Colombia. Time after time, Roosevelt asked Colombia to grant us the land to build the canal, and repeatedly Colombia denied his request. Impatient with Colombia, and insistent that the United States had the right as the power in the West to build the canal, TR helped stage the Panamanian Revolution against Colombia. Panama won its independence from Colombia. They granted the United States the land needed to build the canal. The next progressive foreign policy is William Howard Taft's dollar diplomacy. Taft simply built on the Roosevelt Corollary and pledged that the United States would not only use military force to back its stance as the dominant power in the West, but would also provide economic aid in order to keep Europe and Asia out of the Western Hemisphere. Here's the situation. If any poor country in the Western Hemisphere owed money to any European or Asian powers, in order to prevent them from defaulting on that loan, causing Europe and Asia to interfere in the Western Hemisphere, United States banks and businesses would loan the money to those Latin American countries themselves, paying off those debts. With the debts paid off, foreign powers would have no influence in the West whatsoever. Instead, those Latin American countries would owe their debt to the United States. If the countries defaulted on their loans to the United States, U.S. firms could ask for land, resources, and other interests. It kept foreign powers out of the West, but also increased the wealth and economic influence the United States had in the Western Hemisphere.